In the year 2156, the discovery of a new scientific breakthrough left the world stunned. Emotions, once thought to be mere reactions of the mind, were discovered to hold untapped potential. What began as a fringe research project soon turned into a worldwide phenomenon. Human emotions, joy, anger, sorrow, fear, and love, could now be manipulated and harnessed as powerful energy sources. Scientists had found that these feelings, when amplified or channeled correctly, could manifest as physical forces. Dr. Elias Van Rijk, a scientist from the United Earth Science Consortium, was the one who unlocked this secret. His team's first successful experiment involved amplifying a subject's anger until it could generate a shockwave strong enough to tear through concrete. The potential was unimaginable. Emotions could now be used in combat, politics, and even in everyday life. However, the initial euphoria of discovery was followed by an unsettling realization. Human emotions, while powerful, were not always controllable. What happened when fear overwhelmed a person? Or when sorrow became so intense that it turned into despair? And worse yet, could someone weaponize love to dominate others? The first tests were voluntary, with people eager to be part of the most revolutionary breakthrough in history. But soon, darker aspects of human nature began to emerge. Governments, factions, and corporations seized the new technology. What was meant to be a boon for humanity became its greatest threat. In the shadows of political turmoil, factions began using emotional manipulation as a means of power. Large cities fell under the sway of corporate entities that specialized in using fear and sadness to break the spirit of resistance. At the same time, criminal syndicates began training individuals to harness rage to intimidate their enemies. By tapping into the primal core of emotion, they were able to control vast territories, leaving anyone who opposed them either destroyed or subjugated. It wasn't long before an underground resistance began to form. A group calling themselves the Soulbinders rejected the use of emotional weaponry, arguing that it would eventually destroy the very essence of humanity. They knew that the line between power and madness was razor-thin, and they aimed to stop those who were willing to exploit the power of emotion for their gain. But their efforts came at a high cost. The Soulbinders were labeled as terrorists, and the people who joined them were hunted down. Yet, their message resonated with a select few, those who believed that human emotions, if left unchecked, would tear humanity apart from within. Among the Soulbinders was a woman named Kira Mendez, who had lost everything to the emotional manipulation of the corporate overlords. Once a skilled diplomat and negotiator, Kira had witnessed the devastation of entire populations, emotionally enslaved by those who controlled their feelings. It was her family's destruction that drove her to fight back. She had seen firsthand how fear could paralyze entire governments and how sorrow could collapse entire nations. It was in the quiet of her base, a hidden network of former diplomats, soldiers, and activists, that Kira hatched a plan. They needed to get to the source of this weaponized emotion and destroy it before it spiraled into the chaos that could end humanity. Her first target was a new weapon system being developed in secret by a corporation called Intellectra. This company, led by the enigmatic CEO Victor Lang, had perfected the emotional amplifier technology. Intellectra's new device was capable of amplifying emotions to such a degree that it could trigger global shifts in the balance of power. If Kira and her team couldn't stop it, the world would be plunged into an age of tyranny, where every move was dictated by fear or greed. As Kira prepared to infiltrate the heavily guarded Intellectra facility, she couldn't shake the weight of the moral dilemma at hand. How far could she go to save the world?
And at what cost?
In the end, would she become as corrupted by the power of emotions as those she sought to stop? The Soulbinders' mission was clear, but the path forward was fraught with peril. In a world where emotions were not just felt but weaponized, Kira knew that the line between hero and villain was perilously thin. The stakes had never been higher, and she had to decide whether saving humanity meant becoming something else entirely. Kira Mendez and her team had spent weeks gathering intelligence on Intellectra's secret facility, and the time for action had come. The location was buried deep within the icy mountains of the Arctic Circle, a place so remote that even the most advanced satellites could hardly detect anything out of the ordinary. Intellectra, ever the cautious corporation, had built its facility far from prying eyes, relying on the harsh environment as its first line of defense. But Kira and the Soulbinders had their own ways of circumventing barriers. With an eclectic mix of military veterans, former hackers, and dissident scientists, they had formed a group capable of infiltrating the most secure locations on Earth. Their covert entry was planned to perfection, an EMP pulse that would temporarily disable the facility's security grid, followed by a stealth approach to the central data core. It was a dangerous mission. If they were discovered, there was no chance of escape. The corporation had taken every precaution to guard their secret weapon, emotion-based amplification technology capable of inducing massive shifts in global sentiment. And there was one more terrifying detail. The weapon wasn't just a tool for manipulating individuals. It could create an emotional contagion, rippling out and influencing entire populations, perhaps even entire continents. Kira had no illusions about what the future would hold if Intellectra succeeded in deploying the device. Emotions would be turned into currency, with the rich and powerful controlling the hearts and minds of everyone else. No one would be free. Even now, the world's most influential figures were beginning to use emotional manipulation to gain dominance. Some were already leveraging the technology to keep populations in check. Governments and corporate moguls alike had grown accustomed to the power of fear, sadness, and anger, using it to mold society to their whims. As Kira and her team breached the outer walls of the Intellectra compound, the first signs of resistance appeared. Drone sentries patrolled the perimeter, their sensors calibrated to detect even the faintest of human signals. But the Soulbinders had anticipated this. Using specialized cloaking devices, they slipped past the drones undetected, slipping into the compound's heart like shadows. The further they penetrated into the facility, the more the weight of their mission pressed upon Kira. She had always believed in diplomacy, in the power of conversation and understanding to resolve conflicts. But in this new world, where emotions had been weaponized, diplomacy felt almost naive. The lines between right and wrong were increasingly blurred. Who could be trusted when even the most basic human feelings could be twisted and used against you? They reached the facility's central chamber, a massive, gleaming structure that pulsed with the power of emotion. At its core was the device, an enormous machine that hummed with an eerie energy. Tendrils of glowing blue light snaked around the structure, the very air vibrating with an intensity that made Kira's skin crawl. The machine was both a marvel of technology and a nightmare in the making. "Is this it?" whispered Rowan, a former soldier and Kira's right hand in the operation. His eyes scanned the chamber with nervous anticipation. Kira nodded solemnly. "This is the source of everything. This is what's been tearing the world apart." But as they approached the machine, something unexpected happened. A voice, soft but commanding, echoed through the chamber. "You're too late, Mendez." Victor Lang, CEO of Intellectra, stepped out from the shadows. His expression was calm, as if he had been expecting them. He wasn't armed, but his presence alone felt like an assault. The machine behind him seemed to respond to his will, its hum growing louder, its tendrils pulsing more aggressively. "You've made a mistake coming here," Lang continued. "I don't need to explain myself to you, Kira. The world is changing, and we're the ones shaping it. Emotions are the future. The ones who control them will shape society in their image." Kira stepped forward, her voice steady. "You're using humanity's core feelings as weapons. You're breaking people, Lang. You're turning the entire world into puppets." Lang smiled, his gaze cold and calculating. "Emotions have always been weapons. They always have been. I'm just the first to understand how to control them. Fear, anger, joy, these are not flaws, Mendez. They are tools. And with them, I will reshape the world." Akira's heart raced, her resolve hardening. "You think you can control them forever? Emotions are volatile. You can't predict their consequences." Lang's smile deepened, his confidence unwavering. "That's where you're wrong. I already have." Before Kira could respond, The room filled with a blinding light, and for a moment, she felt a wave of raw emotion wash over her. Rage, sorrow, despair, each sensation felt like a physical blow, overwhelming her senses. It was as if Lang was tapping into the emotional frequency of the room, amplifying it with the machine's power. Kira gritted her teeth and focused, fighting the pull of the overwhelming emotions. "Rowan, get to the core," she shouted. "We need to shut it down." But Lang was ready. He stepped back, raising his hand toward the device. The emotions in the room surged, twisting into an invisible force that pressed against the soul binders like a physical barrier. Kira felt her legs grow weak, her chest tightening. This was no ordinary machine. It was a weapon, a force capable of crushing their wills. In that moment, Kira understood. The war for humanity's soul was just beginning. The room trembled as Kira fought to regain her balance, her mind reeling from the overwhelming surge of emotions that threatened to drown her. Fear, anger, sorrow. Each one was a wave crashing against her consciousness, and it felt like the walls of the facility were closing in. For a brief moment, she feared she might lose herself in the flood of sensations, but she clenched her fists and reminded herself of her purpose. "Rowan," she shouted again, her voice strained but clear. "Get to the core. We have to shut it down." The former soldier, his face etched with determination, was already moving toward the central platform, where the emotional amplifier pulsed with malevolent energy. The machine, a towering structure of sleek black metal and glowing tendrils, seemed almost alive, its hum resonating with a power that made the very air vibrate. The walls around them flickered with the echoes of raw emotion, and for the first time, Kira realized just how far the world had fallen. Victor Lang watched them with an unsettling calm, his eyes glittering with the confidence of someone who believed they were untouchable. His fingers twitched, and Kira could feel the weight of his gaze on her, as if he was manipulating the very emotions in the room to his advantage. "You don't understand, Kira," Lang said softly, almost pityingly. "This isn't just a weapon. It's evolution. Humanity's future is written in emotion. You're still clinging to old notions of free will and choice, but those days are over. I've perfected the process. Emotions aren't just feelings anymore. They're a force. They can be controlled, channeled, amplified to create a world where chaos no longer reigns. Where people no longer suffer under the weight of their own unpredictability." Kira's gaze flickered to the machine, the tendrils of light twisting and turning with eerie precision, like the fingers of a puppeteer. "You think you can create order by controlling people's emotions?" Her voice was steady, though she could feel the effects of Lang's manipulation pressing against her will. "You're not creating order. You're building a prison." Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. "A prison? Perhaps. But one where the prisoners don't even realize they're confined." As he spoke, the machine began to hum louder, and Kira felt her pulse quicken. The emotional waves intensified, pressing down on her, trying to break her focus. She staggered, momentarily losing her footing, but her resolve hardened. She couldn't allow Lang to win.
Not now.
Not after everything they had fought for. Rowan reached the central platform, his hands moving with practiced precision as he connected a series of wires to a small control panel embedded in the machine. His eyes flicked back to Kira for a brief moment, and she saw the hesitation in his expression. He was feeling it too, the weight of the emotions, the crushing pressure of the device. But he had no time for doubt. "I'm almost there," Rowan called out, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked frantically to override the machine systems. Lang's eyes narrowed. "Don't waste your time," he sneered. "You can't shut it down. The amplifier is integrated into the fabric of reality itself. You think you can stop what's already been set into motion? It's too late. The world is changing, and there's nothing you can do to reverse it." Kira's heart pounded in her chest. She knew Lang wasn't lying. The machine was more than just a weapon. It was a paradigm shift, a force capable of reprogramming the very emotions that made humans human. To shut it down now, to stop it from amplifying the global emotional contagion, would require something more than a simple technical fix. Rowan, she said, her voice low but urgent, we can't just destroy it. We need to sever the connection. The machine's power is tied to the emotions of every person on Earth. If we don't break the link, it will never stop. Rowan's brow furrowed as he glanced at her. What are you suggesting? We need to get to the heart of it, Kira replied. The core isn't just a machine. It's a conduit, a channel. If we destroy the core, we sever the flow of emotional energy. But we'll need to create a massive emotional shock, a counterforce strong enough to disrupt the signal. Rowan looked at her, eyes wide. You're talking about using emotions as a weapon? Kira nodded, her jaw clenched. We don't have a choice. But it won't be just any emotion. We need to create a backlash, something that will counterbalance the force Lang has created. Anger won't be enough. Nor fear or sorrow. We need something pure. Lang let out a sharp laugh. Pure? You think you can overcome the power of the amplifier with something as weak as purity? Emotions are chaos, Kira. You can't control them. They will control you. Kira's eyes burned with determination. Then let's make sure they do. Without another word, she closed her eyes and focused. The emotions swirling around her, the ones that Lang had so expertly amplified, were like fire, wild and unpredictable. But in that chaos, there was one emotion she could always rely on: love. The deep, unwavering connection between people, the force that could heal or destroy, that could bind or shatter. She reached into the core of her own being and pulled. She didn't need to think about it. It wasn't about reasoning or logic. It was about the raw, unfiltered power of emotion itself. She felt it rise within her, a tidal wave of love, fierce and unyielding.
Now,
Kira shouted to Rowan. With a final, desperate push, Rowan activated the counterforce. The machine's tendrils pulsed wildly as the surge of pure emotion surged through it, a shockwave that rattled the very foundation of the facility. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a deafening crack, the emotional amplifier exploded in a burst of light and sound, the shockwave spreading outward like a ripple across the globe. The machine had been silenced, but so too had Lang's grip on humanity's emotions. The battle for the soul of humanity had just begun, but Kira knew one thing for sure: love, in all its chaotic, unpredictable power, would be the force that would either save or destroy them all. The shockwave from the emotional amplifier's explosion reverberated through the facility, rattling the walls and sending sparks flying from the machine's shattered remnants. Kira stood frozen for a moment, her breath shallow, her pulse racing. She could feel the residual energy of the explosion still buzzing in the air, the echo of a force far beyond her comprehension. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been warped, the weight of the emotions that had been unleashed still pressing against her. Rowan was the first to move, his body tense as he turned to Kira. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice low and strained. The intensity of the emotional backlash had taken a toll on them all, leaving them gasping for air, as if they had just run a marathon. Kira shook her head slowly. "It's not over. This was only one part of the equation. The amplifier might be gone, but the emotions it triggered, they won't just vanish." She was right. As the dust began to settle and the harsh hum of the facility's systems died down, Kira could still feel the aftershocks of the explosion rippling through the world. The emotions that had been amplified by Lang's machine were not confined to the facility. They had been sent out into the atmosphere, spreading like a virus, infecting every mind they touched. The emotional contagion was already taking root, seeping into the hearts and minds of people across the globe. Fear, anger, love, and sorrow, they were all swirling together in a chaotic maelstrom. And Kira realized that, despite their victory over Lang's machine, the battle was far from won. The world was on the brink of collapse, torn between the forces of emotion that had been unleashed and the fragile threads of order that still held it together. "Do you think it's possible to undo what Lang's device has already set in motion?" Rowan asked, his voice laced with doubt. Kira's gaze hardened. "We don't have a choice. If we don't find a way to reverse the emotional contagion, it will destroy everything we've fought for. We need to stabilize the world before it tears itself apart." But how? That was the question that gnawed at Kira's mind. She had hoped that destroying the amplifier would sever the connection between the machine and the emotional feedback loop, but the reality was far more complicated. Emotions were a part of every human being. How could they hope to control or reverse something so deeply embedded in their nature? "Let's get out of here first," Rowan said, snapping her from her thoughts. "We've still got a world to save." The team moved quickly, their escape from the Intellectra facility tense and hurried. They had no idea what the explosion had set in motion, or whether their actions had been enough to stop Lang's influence. But they knew one thing: Lang wasn't done. He had always been one step ahead, and Kira couldn't shake the feeling that his plan was far more insidious than they had realized. The next few weeks were a blur. The Soulbinders had retreated to their underground base, trying to piece together what had happened in the wake of the amplifier's destruction. The emotional contagion that had spread across the globe was worse than anyone had anticipated. Governments were scrambling to maintain control, but they were fighting an invisible war, one they didn't fully understand. People were acting erratically. The emotional pulse that had been amplified and sent across the globe had created a world in which every individual's feelings were heightened to an unbearable degree. In the span of days, cities erupted in violence, while others fell into despair. Political leaders became pawns, manipulated by their own fears and doubts. Even the weather seemed to be affected, as if the entire planet was responding to the heightened emotional state of its inhabitants. Kira sat in the war room of the Soulbinder's base, her face pale as she looked over the reports. "This is worse than I thought," she muttered. "It's not just about controlling emotions anymore. It's about survival." Rowan entered the room, his expression grim. "We've got a bigger problem. We've found signs that Lang isn't just sitting idly by. He's using the chaos to his advantage." Kira looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "He's forming alliances with powerful factions across the globe. They're using emotional manipulation to control entire populations. It's like the world is falling into a new kind of tyranny, one where emotions are the ultimate currency," Rowan explained. Kira clenched her fists, her mind racing. "We need to stop him before he can consolidate his power. But how? If we attack him directly, we risk making things worse." Rowan's eyes darkened. "There's something else. We've intercepted communications suggesting that Lang is building a new weapon. Something far worse than the amplifier." Kira's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of weapon?" "We're not sure yet," Rowan replied. "But it's clear he's not done. He's using the emotional contagion to fuel his rise, and he plans to use this new device to control the world completely. If we don't act fast, it won't matter what we've done. Lang will have all the power he needs." Kira knew they couldn't wait any longer. She had already lost so much: her family, her country, her sense of normalcy. Now it was time to fight back, not just for the future of humanity, but for the very essence of what it meant to be human. They had destroyed one amplifier, but Lang was building something worse. The battle was far from over, and if the Soulbinders couldn't stop him now, the world would be lost. Kira's mind raced as she absorbed the news. Lang had already exploited humanity's most vulnerable emotions: fear, anger, and love. Now he was building something even more powerful, something that could cement his control over the entire planet. But what kind of weapon could surpass the emotional amplifier? And how had he been able to develop it so quickly? The Soulbinders were stretched thin. Many of their best operatives had been lost in the fight against Intellectra's first device, and the world's chaos made it impossible to gather more support. Even so, they had no choice but to press on. The fate of humanity was on the line. "We can't wait for more intel," Kira said, her voice steely. "We need to find Lang's new weapon and destroy it before it can be fully deployed. We can't afford to let him consolidate his power." Rowan nodded, his face grim. "We've already tried to infiltrate some of the places where we think he's building it, but he's using his influence to keep his movements hidden. He's learned from his past mistakes. We'll need a different strategy." Kira leaned forward, her mind working through the options. Time was running out. The emotional contagion was still affecting people across the globe, and Lang's rise to power was accelerating. The world had entered a state of near-permanent instability, and Lang was ready to capitalize on it. We'll need a two-pronged approach, Kira finally decided. First, we'll locate the new weapon. And second, we'll have to gather more support. We can't fight this alone. If we can sway the emotions of the people who are still resisting Lang's influence, we might have a chance. Rowan raised an eyebrow. Sway their emotions? You're suggesting we use what Lang has exploited against him. Kira nodded, her gaze unwavering.
Yes.
But we have to be careful. The people are already unstable, overwhelmed by the flood of amplified emotions. We need to create a counterbalance, something to remind them of their humanity, their strength. Rowan looked skeptical, but didn't argue. The idea of using emotions as a weapon felt almost too dangerous, but Kira was right. If they couldn't find a way to stabilize the chaos, the world would fall to Lang. Over the next few days, the Soulbinders worked tirelessly. Kira led a small team of operatives to track down Lang's movements, using the remaining intelligence networks they had access to. They infiltrated old government archives, intercepted encrypted transmissions, and followed a trail of secret shipments that hinted at the construction of Lang's new device. It was clear that he was moving fast, too fast. They had to catch up. Meanwhile, Rowan worked with the remaining Soulbinders to create the counterforce they needed. They couldn't rely solely on love again. This time, they would need something more universal, something that could resonate with every human being, no matter where they were. I think I've got it, Rowan said one night, pacing in the Soulbinders' underground base. I've been analyzing the emotional spectrum that's been unleashed, and there's one emotion that hasn't been fully utilized by Lang. It's the emotion that holds society together, the one that lets people work together, despite their differences. Kira looked up from her notes, intrigued. And what emotion is that? Hope, Rowan said, his voice steady. Hope is the thread that ties all of us together. Even in the darkest times, hope is what keeps people fighting, keeps them pushing forward. Kira considered his words carefully. But hope is fragile. It's easy to lose in times like this. How do we use it to stabilize the emotional contagion? Rowan smiled faintly. It's not about creating hope from nothing. It's about reminding people that hope exists within them. It's about showing them that, no matter how dark things seem, they still have the power to change their world. If we can amplify hope, just enough to give people a sense of purpose again, we might be able to cut through the chaos. Kira nodded, the plan taking shape in her mind. It won't be easy. People are scared, angry, and exhausted. But it's the only chance we've got. The team had managed to trace Lang's movements to a hidden facility in the heart of an isolated mountain range. Intelligence reports suggested that it was a place where Lang's new weapon, rumored to be a massive network of satellites, was being constructed. The weapon, if fully deployed, could amplify emotions across entire continents, creating a global wave of fear, anger, or despair, whichever Lang chose. We're getting close, Kira said as she surveyed the facility from a distance. The compound was well guarded, and the mountainous terrain made any direct approach nearly impossible. We'll have to go in under the radar, hit fast, and destroy the weapon before Lang can activate it. Rowan and the others nodded in agreement, but Kira could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. If they failed, the world would be irrevocably changed. Emotions would no longer belong to humanity, they would belong to Lang. They gathered their gear and set out toward the facility under the cover of night, moving quickly through the rugged terrain. As they approached, Kira felt the familiar rush of adrenaline flood her system, but it was tempered by the knowledge of what was at stake. This time, it wasn't just about stopping Lang's technology. It was about saving humanity from itself. The emotional contagion had torn the world apart, but if they could succeed in their mission, they might still have a chance to rebuild, if they could remind the people of their humanity. As they breached the facility's outer defenses, Kira's heart raced. It was now or never. The facility's inner sanctum was darker than Kira had anticipated, its metal walls pulsating with an eerie, unnatural hum. She could feel the weight of the emotion-fueled technology all around her. The tendrils of fear, anger, and despair that Lang had cultivated were woven into the very structure of the base. Every step felt like wading through a thick fog of unstable emotions, each one threatening to overwhelm her. "Stay sharp," Kira whispered, motioning for her team to halt as they entered a narrow hallway. "Lang's weapon is close. We don't know what kind of security measures he has left, so we need to move fast." Rowan, his face tense, nodded and signaled the others to follow. The soulbinders moved like shadows, their steps silent as they advanced deeper into the compound. Every corner held the potential for danger: guards, automated defenses, or worse, Lang himself. Kira's thoughts raced, though she kept her focus on the task at hand. If they didn't destroy Lang's new weapon, it would amplify the emotional contagion on a global scale. The world would fall under Lang's complete control, twisted by the raw, unfiltered emotions of humanity. Every person would become a puppet to his will, lost in the sea of amplified feelings. But there was one thing Lang hadn't counted on: hope. Rowan had been right. Hope was the antidote to the chaos Lang had wrought. It wasn't just an emotion, it was a belief, a force that could counterbalance the most destructive feelings. But it needed to be carefully channeled. Kira knew that if they could manage to spark that hope in people, amplify it just enough, it could break Lang's hold on the world. If they couldn't, all would be lost. As they moved through the compound, the air grew thick with a tension Kira could feel in her bones. The emotional contagion was more potent here. Lang's weapon was nearby, and it seemed as if every emotion in the building was feeding into the machine, growing stronger by the second. Kira had seen the destructive potential of emotion before, but this was something else. This was a weaponized emotional landscape, and they were standing right in the heart of it. "There," Rowan whispered, pointing ahead. At the far end of the corridor, the door to a massive control room stood open, the faintest glow of light emanating from inside. Kira motioned for her team to approach silently. As they neared, the faint hum of machinery grew louder, a discordant symphony of energy feeding into something vast and unseen. The control room was bathed in a flickering light, illuminated by a network of interconnected screens and displays. In the center of the room, a massive, spherical structure pulsed with light: Lang's new weapon. It was a satellite system, linked to thousands of devices across the globe. But there was something different about this weapon. It was designed to amplify emotions on a far greater scale than the previous device, a network of satellites that could broadcast emotional energy into the minds of billions of people. "This is it," Kira said, her voice grim. "Lang's global emotional network." Rowan stepped forward, studying the equipment. "It's worse than we thought. This weapon doesn't just amplify emotions. It shapes them. Lang can control what people feel: fear, anger, sadness. He can broadcast anything to the entire world." Kira clenched her fists. "We need to destroy it."
Now?
The team spread out, working quickly to disable the satellite array, but Kira couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was a presence in the room, an oppressive weight pressing down on them. She looked up just as a figure appeared in the doorway, a faint smile on his lips.
Victor Lang.
"So you found me," Lang said, his voice smooth and cold. He didn't seem surprised in the slightest. "I must admit I'm impressed. But you're too late." Kira's eyes narrowed. "It's over, Lang. We're destroying your weapon. The world won't be your puppet anymore." Lang chuckled, his eyes glinting with a dangerous calm. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you're dealing with. The emotional contagion, the fear and anger, it's already embedded in the fabric of the world. Even if you destroy this weapon, you can't undo what's already been done. Humanity is mine, Kira. Whether you like it or not." Kira felt the rush of emotions begin to build, like a tidal wave crashing toward her.
Fear, rage, despair.
She could feel them seeping into her consciousness, threatening to overwhelm her. Lang's presence was like a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of chaos with his very will. But Kira had learned to withstand the power of emotions before. "Rowan now," she shouted. Rowan didn't hesitate. He pressed a series of buttons on the control panel, his hands moving with practiced precision. A burst of energy shot through the room, and the weapon's power flickered, the systems going haywire. Lang's smile faltered, his confidence shaking for the first time. You can't stop it, Lang sneered, his eyes narrowing. It's too late. But Kira's voice was steady, unwavering. Maybe not. But we can stop you. With a final surge of energy, Rowan activated the self-destruct sequence on the satellite system. The room trembled as the weapon's core overloaded, the explosion sending a shockwave of energy through the facility. Kira felt the emotions that had been building, Lang's emotions, finally begin to dissipate. The fear, the rage, the despair, they all started to fade, replaced by something else. A sense of relief. A spark of hope. The machine was gone, but the battle wasn't over. Lang, though defeated, wasn't finished. His influence over the world's emotions had left a permanent scar, and Kira knew that, in the aftermath of their victory, they would have to rebuild. Outside, the sky was changing. The storm that had raged across the world for so long was beginning to calm. People who had been swept up in the emotional chaos were slowly regaining their senses, the heavy weight of amplified emotions lifting from their minds. We did it, Rowan said, his voice soft with disbelief. It's over. For now, Kira thought. But she knew this was just the beginning. The world was healing, but the wounds Lang had inflicted would take time to mend. Humanity would have to learn to control its own emotions once again, without fear of them being manipulated. And Kira would be there, guiding them, using the very force Lang had tried to exploit, hope. Because even in the darkest times, hope was what held them together. It always had been. And now, it was the force that would save them. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a pale light over the fractured world. The emotional contagion had faded, but its scars were deep. The world was not the same as it had been before Lang's manipulation. What had been an orderly society was now in tatters, with nations still reeling from the chaos Lang had set in motion. Kira stood on the balcony of the Soulbinder's base, looking out over a desolate landscape. The air was heavy with the aftermath of the battle, the uncertainty of what came next. The war had been won, but the cost was steep. Thousands had lost their lives, millions had been affected by the emotional upheaval, and the path to recovery seemed daunting. Do you think we can rebuild? Rowan's voice interrupted her thoughts, and Kira turned to find him standing at the doorway, his face etched with fatigue. We have to, Kira replied, her gaze still locked on the horizon. But it's going to take time. People don't just forget what happened to them, not after everything they've experienced. Rowan stepped closer, his eyes filled with concern. I know, but you've seen it yourself. There's hope now. People are starting to come together. We've seen the first signs of it. Communities are beginning to heal. Kira sighed. Yes, but it's not enough. Lang's influence is still everywhere, even if his weapon is destroyed. We're dealing with the aftermath of years of emotional manipulation. The wound Lang left isn't just physical, it's psychological. People are going to struggle to trust each other again. Rowan was silent for a moment, then spoke. You know, Kira, sometimes it feels like we're fighting a battle we can't win. We can't reverse the past, no matter how much we want to. All we can do is move forward and make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Kira nodded, though her heart felt heavy. The weight of the world's brokenness was still fresh in her mind. I know, but it's not just about the past. We have to teach people how to heal. We have to remind them of what we're capable of, not just of what we've lost. As they spoke, a quiet buzzing sound interrupted their conversation. Kira's attention snapped to the device on her wrist, a distress signal. She tapped it, and the holographic display flickered to life. We have a situation, came a voice, strained with urgency. It was Dax, one of the Soulbinder's top analysts. Kira straightened, instantly alert. What's happening? We've intercepted a broadcast, Dax explained. It's Lang. He's alive.
And he's not done.
We thought we'd gotten rid of him, but he's using the emotional contagion he triggered to rally a new faction. He's not building weapons, but he's building something else, a network of followers, a movement. Kira's heart sank. Where is he? Somewhere in the ruins of the old capital, Dax said. He's gathering the disillusioned, those who are most affected by the emotional fallout. They're looking for a new leader, someone who can promise them stability, someone who can take control. Lang is exploiting the very same emotions that tore the world apart. Rowan's expression darkened. So Lang's trying to create a new empire built on the ashes of the old world. Kira clenched her fists, the weight of it all crashing down on her once again. They had destroyed Lang's weapon, but they hadn't ended his influence. In fact, Lang had turned the chaos of his own making into a rallying cry for his followers. People were still emotionally fragile, and Lang was ready to exploit that vulnerability. "We can't let him rise again," Kira said firmly, determination hardening her resolve. "If we don't act now, his movement will grow. And when it does, it'll be worse than ever. The world can't afford to go through another round of emotional manipulation." Rowan nodded. "We'll need support. The Soulbinders can't do this alone." Kira looked at him, understanding his unspoken concern. "I know. We'll need more than just us. But we can't wait for the world to recover. Lang is already taking advantage of the chaos, and every day we hesitate, his influence spreads." The Soulbinders regrouped, strategizing their next move. The world's fractured political systems were still in disarray, and people were desperate for something to hold on to. Lang had figured that out, and now he was exploiting the cracks in society, pulling the emotionally broken and vulnerable into his orbit. His new movement was subtle at first, but its undercurrent was strong, promising unity under his leadership, even if that unity was built on the manipulation of the very emotions that had torn the world apart. Kira knew they couldn't afford to fight Lang's army of followers head-on. This wasn't a war they could win with force alone. They would need to reach the people, to show them that there was another way, one that didn't rely on the manipulation of emotions. They would have to rebuild trust and restore hope in something greater than Lang's empty promises. Rowan, Kira, and the rest of the team began to travel, gathering those who still believed in the possibility of a better world. They worked in the shadows, restoring the fractured pieces of society, small communities at first, but eventually, word began to spread. It wasn't just hope they needed. It was a new vision, a vision that rejected the emotional manipulation that had almost destroyed them. They worked tirelessly, reaching out to leaders who had resisted Lang's influence. They built alliances, sharing the knowledge they had gained in their fight against Lang. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but it was the only way to take back the future. And then, as they were gaining ground, a breakthrough. They discovered Lang's new base of operations, a network of fortified locations scattered across the remains of major cities, where he was gathering his followers in secret. If they could take down these strongholds, they could finally break Lang's stranglehold on the emotional contagion that still pulsed beneath the surface of the world. Kira stood once more on the balcony, looking out over the city in the distance. The world was slowly healing, but the threat of Lang still loomed large. She had always believed in humanity's potential, in its ability to overcome even the darkest of circumstances. And now, more than ever, she knew that the fight was far from over. Lang might have been defeated once, but he wasn't going down without a fight. And neither would Kira. The wind howled across the ruins of the old capital, the remnants of a once great city, now a shell of its former self. Towering buildings stood in broken silhouettes against the crimson horizon, reminders of the world before Lang's reign of emotional terror. But this time, the air was different. It was filled with the promise of something more, of finality, of resolution. Kira stood at the edge of the newly formed alliance, watching the armies of resistance gather beneath her. Thousands of people from all walks of life had come together, their hearts united by the singular purpose of ending Lang's grip on humanity for good. They had built something from the ashes, hope, not just as an abstract concept, but as a driving force. "Everyone is ready," Rowan said, his voice tinged with both resolve and exhaustion. He was beside Kira, his eyes scanning the horizon. "This is the moment we've all been waiting for. It's all come down to this." Kira nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. The emotional contagion had left its mark, and the world still bore its scars. But humanity was stronger now, more resilient, more united. It wasn't just hope they fought for anymore. It was the belief that they could rise above the darkness, that they could finally claim their emotions as their own, free from Lang's manipulation. Lang won't go down easily, Kira said, her gaze hardening. He's built his movement on the same fear and anger he's used to control the masses. But we've learned how to fight back. This time, we're fighting for more than just survival. We're fighting for the future. Rowan's face softened with understanding. We've got the support now. We've got the strength. Let's take him down. The Soulbinders and their allies moved swiftly across the broken city, their forces spread out in a well-coordinated effort to dismantle Lang's strongholds. The movement they had built wasn't just about overpowering Lang's forces. It was about offering an alternative. It was about restoring trust in humanity, proving that emotions could be a source of unity, not division. As they advanced, Kira felt the pull of Lang's influence lurking in the shadows. The network of satellites that had once broadcast his manipulation might be destroyed, but Lang's followers were still using their emotions as weapons. Fear and anger swirled through the streets, and Kira could feel the gravity of their power. She had to resist the temptation to let those feelings overwhelm her, just as the people of the world had to. But they were ready. The final battle began at dawn. Lang's stronghold was a towering fortress, nestled deep within the heart of the city. The walls were fortified with technology that could amplify the emotions of anyone who ventured too close. It was a perfect reflection of Lang's philosophy: power through control, through fear, through rage. But it was also his greatest weakness. Kira and her team led the charge, cutting through the defenses with precision. Each step brought them closer to Lang's inner sanctum, where he would surely be waiting. They fought not with the brute force that Lang had relied on, but with the very emotions he had sought to control. At the gates of the fortress, Kira stopped. She could feel the pull of Lang's presence, stronger than ever before. His anger was like a thunderstorm, crackling through the air. But Kira was different now. She had learned how to channel the raw power of human emotion into something more. "Stay focused," Kira said to her team, her voice calm. "We're not here to destroy him. We're here to free the people from his grip. This isn't about winning the battle, it's about winning the future." The team moved forward, and the battle intensified as they fought their way deeper into Lang's lair. The closer they got to him, the more overwhelming the emotions became. It felt as though the very walls of the fortress were alive with Lang's influence, pulsing with an energy that threatened to swallow them whole. But Kira stood firm, drawing on the strength of the hope they had built, the hope that had driven them this far. And then they reached the heart of the fortress. Lang stood there, surrounded by a cadre of his most loyal followers. His eyes gleamed with a cruel satisfaction as he saw them approach. "You really think you can defeat me?" Lang sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "I have turned your greatest strength into my weapon. Emotions are my domain now. You will never stop me." But Kira wasn't intimidated. She had heard this before: his arrogance, his belief that he could control what was beyond his grasp. But he didn't understand. He never had. "Your time is over, Lang," Kira said, stepping forward. "You've manipulated fear, anger, and despair. But there's one thing you can't control: hope." As she spoke, a strange, steady calm settled over the battlefield. The emotional chaos that Lang had been cultivating for years seemed to pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The resistance forces, standing behind Kira, drew strength from that single word. They were tired, battered, but they were no longer afraid. And neither was Kira. Hope surged within her, a force stronger than anything Lang had ever used. She knew what they had to do now. With a final, collective push, the Alliance flooded Lang's stronghold with their resolve, their belief in something better, in something beyond manipulation. It was a wave of emotion like nothing Lang had ever experienced, pure, untainted, and fueled by the knowledge that they were fighting for a future free from fear. The fortress walls crumbled, the satellites flickered, and Lang's control began to unravel. His influence, once so pervasive, faltered as the tide of hope surged through the hearts of his followers. They turned away from him, freed from the emotional chains he had bound them with. Lang's defiance evaporated into something else, fear. But it was too late. The world had already moved on. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. Lang was captured, his power broken. The storm that had raged across the globe for so long was finally over. In the aftermath, Kira stood in the ruins of Lang's fortress, watching the survivors begin to rebuild. The world was fractured, but it was not beyond repair. It would take time, more time than any of them could predict, but humanity had learned a valuable lesson. Emotions could be a source of division, yes, but they could also be the glue that bound them together. Kira knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be those who sought to exploit emotions for power. But now, humanity knew how to fight back, not with anger, not with fear, but with hope. And as the sun set over the horizon, Kira couldn't help but believe that the future was theirs to shape.